Hey guys, Hudson Fisk here. You know, a lot of guys have been asking me lately, what the hell is going on with lumber prices? Right now it's May 3rd, 2021. And there's been a few videos put out there about why the prices are so high. And they're partially correct, but they're missing a big part of the equation. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. I do a little logging myself, so I've got my hands on the kind of the pulse of what's going on with the timber industry, and I think there's something that folks don't really understand when it comes to logging and timber operations in general. And that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go back to the house, sit down at my kitchen table, and kind of go over a few things with you. But I was supposed to be hauling a load of logs today. The truck has a big air leak in the dash, so I've got my mechanic here working on it now. The rest of the video will be basically about what's going on with lumber prices and why, and basically, you know, things are going to have to change with our political environment for it to really get much better. And it's something that it actually is starting to kind of change back in that direction, which is a good thing. Ultimately, down the road, the timber industry in the United States could be something that really is a great provider of employment, a great supplier for materials, for, of course, you know, lumber for construction, but not just 2x4s, you know, plywood, particle board, door and window framing, fascia boards. I mean, really, we have so many different species of lumber or of timber in our country that we as a nation are totally capable of being 100% self-reliant without having to import any lumber at all. And as the way things stand right now, we're importing most of our lumber, and that's not right. So anyway, stay tuned. Give me a chance to get home. I'll sit down at the kitchen table and kind of go over some things with you there, and hope this answers a few questions for you. But and if you're like me, it should make you angry what's going on. I know I have been angry since the 90s about the whole situation. So, but like I said, the pendulum is starting to swing back in a different direction, and to our benefit, I think, but albeit very slowly. And I think really what's brought that on is the rampant wildfires that the West Coast, you know, we've had out here in the West, that are just decimating our forests and, you know, vaporizing our valuable resources. So, all right, guys, I'm going to get down off this trailer and head home. We'll talk it over. The biggest reason for lumber prices surging so much is the fact that loggers are having to put up and deal with so much government oversight. I've been logging off and on all my life since I was in my teens. I'm 56 years old now. And I've seen, since probably the mid-90s, a steady, slow death by 1,000 cuts of the logging industry here in Central California. And the biggest reason for that really, well, it all started out really in the mid-90s with the spotted owl debacle. And the Sierra Clubbers and others like that, other groups like that, putting a lot of pressure on the government to shut down logging or stop clear cutting. And, you know, for the most part in California, there never has been much clear cutting that I'm aware of. It's always been selective logging. And at least for our area here, it works quite well. Since the spotted owl controversy took place, the government, the Forest Service, seems to have steadily reduced the amount of ground being put out to bid for logging operations. And that's really a tragedy, because as a result, we've seen a huge increase in really devastating forest fires. And the drought situation, of course, came along right after all this spotted owl stuff got going, and the rules were changed in regards to how many acres could be logged and so forth in the state. Now, I live in Oakhurst, California, and typically when I haul logs today, I go either to Sonora, which is about 80 miles probably, or 85 miles from here, or down to Terabella, which is down by Pixley, east of Pixley, which is about 130 miles from here. I prefer to go to Sonora, even though it's a windy road. It is shorter, and it's just a slower, for me, just easier, less nerve-wracking route to take, even though it is a very windy switchback road. I just take it nice and slow and easy, and there's not nearly as much traffic to contend with, and it's just a lot more relaxing drive. Taking big loads of logs down big freeways to get down to the Pixley area, just to have a lot more to be concerned about as far as dropping bark on the road and it kicking up and hitting somebody's windshield, that type of thing. And bark does fall off the logs, no matter how hard you try to break off and remove the loose, flaky bark. You can't always get it all. So that's the route I choose. Now, back in the 80s, when I started logging here in California, there were about 6 mills. One was probably 10 miles from here. So it was very easy, very convenient. And back in those days, say late 80s, the price per 1,000 board feet was higher then than it has ever been since. So you're wondering why the price of lumber is so high? Well, I can tell you it's certainly not because they're paying loggers more money for the logs. We get about, back in those days, I was getting about, on average, $800 per 1,000 board feet brought in. The last loads I just took in were about $350 per 1,000 board feet. And I have to truck it 80 miles instead of 10 miles. Not only that, my cost of fuel has gone way up since the 80s. My cost of insurance has gone way up since the 80s. Cost of workers' comp has gone way, way up since the 80s. So, and all these things have been brought on by government sticking their nose in our livelihood. And as a result of all this, we're now down to 2 sawmills instead of 6. The others have gone bankrupt. In large part because a lot of loggers have gone out of business. And because they couldn't afford to pay the increased costs of hauling the timber, or of paying the extra insurance, or the additional fuel. So I'm a very small-time logger. I'm not a big logging operation. I'm primarily a tree service, but we do get into tree jobs where we do get into some timber that's of quality enough to take it to the sawmill for lumber. And when we do, we try to take it in so it gets put to good use and helps with the supply issues. But if you're wondering why the cost of lumber has gone up so much, it's primarily because if you go to the lumber yard, you'll find most lumber there is not even American. It's been imported from Canada or Switzerland or some other place that makes absolutely no sense to me. We've got more than enough timber to supply all our needs right here in the USA. But we can't access it because of the red tape we have to jump through. A lot of areas have just been closed off from logging altogether, and it's very unfortunate as it's proved out to be, because with the absence of selective logging, and in some places clear-cut logging does make sense. In the absence of that happening, all we're doing is building up a great big pile of kindling in our forests, and just basically waiting for the day for it to catch fire. And it's not a matter of if it will, it's just a matter of when it will. And it makes us, states like California, Nevada, and Oregon, makes us, that tend to be dry in the summer months and very susceptible to fire, makes us very vulnerable to arsonists, even terrorists, or anarchists that want to just create havoc for our country. And I think it's really, really stupid that we've allowed this situation to happen, but it can be fixed. And I know that things have improved a little bit in the last few years because of the forest fires, but a lot more could be done a lot sooner. And California especially needs to get off their butts. I'm talking about the political leaders now, as far as allowing new sawmills to come in, new plywood mills to come in. And I know these companies that do these kinds of operations probably would not even consider trying to open a new facility in this state because of the red tape that they have to deal with, especially in, let's say, plywood construction or production or OSB board production. You have glues and chemicals that go along with that. And so the companies that were here in the past years all moved out of the state. A lot of them went bankrupt because of the new rules and regulations that were put in place to basically, regulate their activities to make sure that they weren't polluting. And there certainly needs to be some oversight. I'm not saying we don't need any oversight, but I think the pendulum has swung way too far to the extreme, to the one side, and we need to get somewhere back to a happy medium where companies can come back in and be successful. At this point, if you want plywood or OSB board, it's imported. There for a while we had ships, I think they were Japanese or possibly Chinese ships that were coming into the ports here on the West Coast, buying logs for people like me, and then they would take the logs out to the sea, out beyond the national border line, where they were not regulated by laws, and they would create they had a factory right on the ship, big ships, and they'd make their OSB board, their plywood, whatever it is they were making, and it's my understanding that whatever the refuse was that was left over from that production process, probably a lot of sawdust and probably little glues and things like that were squeezed out when it goes through the press or however they make it. All that got just pushed overboard into the ocean, because out there in the international waters, there's nobody really watching them, or they're not subject to those rules. They have a huge advantage. Go out there with their little plywood making ship, do their thing with no regulations at all, probably no regulations about labor as well, probably using very cheap labor, and then coming back in and selling back to us our own wood as a finished product at a much, much cheaper price than anybody here on land could possibly make it for. And that's just a very unfair and bad situation. I haven't been approached in the last few years to sell logs to any of those outfits, but I will say I did sell some logs to an outfit like that was coming into the port of Stockton. Now we're going back probably 15, 20 years now, and they paid more than anybody else for the logs that was here on land. So we did take a few loads to them, but ultimately I think the regulators caught up to them, caught onto what they were doing, and put an end to that as well. But that's the kind of thing that happens when you run people out of business that are already set up instead of working with the local mills and everything, they just made it impossible for them to thrive. So they just shut it down. In the case of the most local sawmill, the owner just basically walked away and lost his equity in the property. I do remember they had an auction where they sold off a lot of the equipment and things, but I mean, he got back pennies on the dollar. It was really a sad day. And as a result of that, the little community, North Fork, California, was a bit of they were a little lost there for a while with the mill shut down. That was a major provider of labor and employment for the local community there. So the town was real quiet there for a few years afterwards, and took them a little while to get back on their feet. And it was, again, I feel just very unnecessary. So if you really want to know what's going on with the lumber prices, well, that's it right there. It's government oversight, and they're just being way, way too overbearing with the rules and regulations that they're forcing loggers like me and most, and a lot of other outfits that are a lot bigger than mine to comply with. And it's taken a lot of the profit out of it, but it's also taken a lot of the joy of working out in the woods out of it as well. Because I know that what few loggers are left out there, they're operating on a very, very tight profit line. And I know a few of those guys in particular that, they're pretty much crossing their fingers every spring when they get started with their operation. They're crossing their fingers that by the end of the summer, they'll have made enough money to pay all their guys, make their equipment payments, and have a few bucks stored up for the winter, because loggers typically shut down here in the wintertime as the high country gets snowed in. It's just not feasible to operate. So anyway, that's my take on the lumber prices. I hope that helps you. I've got other videos on my channel about logging, taking logs to the mill and what's involved, how they process them. Recently just took a tour of the sawmill I take my logs to up in Sonora with my son. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let me videotape, so I've got a few pictures, and we're going to make a video about that as well. As far as basically, it'll be a video about transporting the logs up there, and then what the yard looks like when we get unloaded. And then the only thing we can't show you is the actual mill in operation indoors. They didn't want, I'm sure they have proprietary ways of doing things in there they didn't want to show. So, and that's certainly understandable. But all right, guys, hope that helps answer any questions. And if you have any others, why, please leave me a comment below. And like and subscribe. Thanks. God bless. Bye-bye.